Good morning, guys. I just got out of bed and I just was going through my comments while I was in bed. Um, and then I got up, went to the toilet, and then came back and said, I better make a quick video. So this is for Elizabeth Rayner, and I'll just share the screen. So she's asking a question, Harry, just a question. You say that if we are trying to lose weight, we have to reduce fat and eat more protein. But if we are training and recovering from gym and creating gluconeogenesis, does reduce fat can use protein to create gluconeogenesis, taking you out of being fat adapted? I say this because a fat adapted body trains use fat as energy, and if we reduce it, we can use protein, and then we come back to fat and still use fat and protein. Could it then use muscle as energy instead of fat? No. Okay, let's make this perfectly crystal clear. If you are on a species appropriate diet, that means a carnivore diet or a low carb diet, and you're fat adapted, that's a critical part. You've got to be fat adapted. So if you're not fat adapted, that means you've still got insulin resistance, derangements, and stuff like that, and you've got high insulin because of those derangements, then you can't tap into your own body fat. So that's the critical part. That means you cannot activate hormone-sensitive lipase, which is a hormone which basically tells the body to release fat, free fatty acids, take the glycerol, the backbone of the triglyceride, and use that for glucose, for gluconeogenesis. And that is driven by glucagon. You can't get gluconeogenesis if glucagon is suppressed. It doesn't happen. All you do is you've got insulin high that's forcing into storage unless you're oxidizing it. That means unless your mitochondria are basically using that fuel that's coming in, like sugar or whatever else, or a combination of sugar and carbs that are coming in. If they're used fast enough and not engaging the Randle cycle to create a blockade at the cell level, you will be using that as energy. That's what a lot of bodybuilders do. They combine carbs and fat, and they do shitloads of exercise, and they use all that energy. But what they end up doing is, because they're not tapping into their own energy, they end up being muscular fat. That's what a lot of the bodybuilders are. Where if you basically are insulin sensitive, and this is why I say to people, sometimes you have to basically, if you've got derangements, it's going to take some time to become fat adapted. Once you become fat adapted, then it's not a problem. You can actually force the body to become more insulin sensitive by doing like a 3-day fast. You just basically put the brakes, you force the body to become more insulin sensitive, increase ketones, reduce blood sugar, and normalize blood sugar. If you're on tablets and stuff, blood pressure meds and different types of pre-diabetic drugs or whatever the stuff, you're in a deranged state. Your body probably has a high levels of insulin resistance, high levels of derangements, which basically mean it's very hard to tap into fat. The whole purpose of fat is you basically tap into it when you're not eating. So when you're not eating, free fatty acids will flow. Or when you're constricting fat, that means you eat more protein. You can't eat at all sugar. Okay. We don't eat sugar because if you're combining sugar and fat, you're engaging the Randle cycle potentially. And also you're basically reducing your capacity to remain well fat adapted. That means you run a much higher blood sugar and a much higher insulin as well. You tend to run. So, you have to decide whether the low fat or the high fat way. And meaning high fat doesn't mean you have to eat the fat. You can use the fat from your own body. If you don't put enough energy in and you're insulin sensitive, that means you're not running a high insulin, you're running a low insulin. you will tap immediately into your fat stores. That's the whole purpose. You cut, when bodybuilders used to do cuts, they would cut all energy sources, external energy sources, and they will eat protein, because protein is very hard to convert into energy. And the other thing is, it is very hard to basically, break down. So the actual, to catalyze, amino acids and stuff like that, it is a much more involved process. The body, if you're fat adapted, if you're not fat adapted, you'll have energy deficits, and you'll really feel like shit. And that's how you know, if you go high protein and you feel like shit, you know immediately you're not fat adapted. You know that basically you can't tap into your own sources. You've got too high insulin. The insulin to glucagon is out of whack, which basically means is you can't utilize the gluconeogenic capacity of glucagon, and your insulin is too high, so you can't tap into your own body fat stores, which basically means you can't activate sufficiently hormone sensitive lipase. That's the fundamental thing. When you eat fat, it comes in through chylomicrons, goes through the body, through the thoracic duct is one of the major ones, directly into the heart. Heart loves fat. And then basically it circulates around the body. It will go to adipose tissue. So if you eat a lot of fat, the body actually knows. So if you eat, let's say, 10% more fat than the body can actually utilize in that period of time, depending on your body size, that 10% will go to adipose tissue. That means you will store that fat. But that's not a problem, because when you're not eating it, you'll use it. That's the whole purpose. But as long as you're insulin sensitive and your body is still able to activate hormone sensitive lipase. So when it sees an energy deficit in the body, when you're not eating, so you have a meal, you get enough fat, you're fat adapted, and your insulin is low, is in the insulin to glucagon of 1.3. So it's actually, your blood sugars are managed, your insulin is managed. You're in that sweet spot, the ancestral spot, as I call it. When you're in that ancestral state, you will know it, because you basically don't feel hunger. I mean, I can go for hours without feeling hunger. I'm completely fat adapted because I did keto for a very long time. And so I'm completely fat adapted. I can switch back and forward. My body doesn't, I don't feel these energy deficits or anything like that. So when I'm not eating, I'm tapping into my own fat. When I'm eating, and I eat a bit more because I like a bit of cream and stuff like that, and stuff like that. So, having coffee with a lot of cream, obviously that's going to inhibit fat loss from my own body, because I'm getting in enough energy. If I want to basically cut, you've got to be fat adapted. Otherwise, you will actually use the protein if you're not fat adapted. And also you will waste muscle if you're not fat adapted, if you're not putting enough energy in, whether sugar or fat. You need to get energy if you're basically not a fat adapted. But if you're fat adapted, not a problem. You've got to use your own energy. The question is, are you too slim? If you're too slim, and you're fat adapted, obviously you've got to take in energy, because you don't have much fat stores. So you've got to eat fat. But if you've got a bit of weight on you and you've made yourself fat adapted and all that, then you utilize your own fat, you cut. So you prioritize protein, not energy, because you've got shitloads of energy on your body. And remember, it's low deuterium energy because it's fat. And basically creates beautiful metabolic water. It hydrates you as well. So you have to understand the differences in the hormonal state. It's the hormonal state, and that depends on what you're putting in your mouth. That will affect the hormonal, whether you derange those hormonal systems or they are actually working properly. That means insulin, glucagon, leptin, all these things are working properly. They're only working properly, ghrelin, all that. Ghrelin won't rise if hormone sensitive lipase goes up, because you're fat adapted. You will use your own fat, and you've got enough fat stores. Ghrelin won't rise. But let's say you're very, very thin and you don't have a lot of fat stores. Ghrelin will go up to tell you you don't have enough energy on board. You need to eat energy. We need more fat. But if you basically, ghrelin doesn't go up because you're fat adapted and you switch to basically not, oxidizing, not energy that's coming in from the mouth, but energy that's being tapped from your own adipose tissue, your own fat cells. That's the whole purpose. The whole reason why we as a human species have fat cells is to store energy for when we're not eating it. That's the whole purpose. So when you eat fat, any excess amounts that you will go to adipose tissue. Now, if you can't tap into it because the hormones are deranged and all that, that's when you continually add fat day in, day out, day in, day out, and eventually you become obese. It's not the fat is basically making you obese. Fat has to be stored excess when you're eating it. But when you're deranged, and the only derangement happens when you actually add two energy sources, sugar and fat together, and engage the Randall cycle and cause a blockade, then the body has excess energy that it can't utilize in the actual bloodstream. And so what does it do? It converts it all to fat and puts it away. And also, because insulin goes high, as a consequence, it inhibits hormone sensitive lipase. So you can't tap into your fat stores. So if you want to tap into your fat stores, you either have to basically go very low fat or very low carb. There is no way other about it. That's the only time these systems actually activate. The only time hormone sensitive lipase activates, the only time that uncoupling happens and you actually radiate it away as heat. It's the only time it happens. If you mix your macros, which a lot of these idiots in the bodybuilding environment are talking about, if you mix your macros, you will become muscular fat. There is no way about it because you're causing insulin resistance. Yes, you're driving some, because of the high leucine content, you're still driving that protein into muscle protein synthesis, but you're going to be muscular fat. The only way to be muscular lean is to become basically sensitive to insulin, to become insulin sensitive. And the only way is to do it as a low carb diet. This whole notion that you need carbs to put on muscle is bonkers. Leucine is the key amino acid that is driving muscle protein synthesis. It is a regulator of insulin. You do not need carbs to basically achieve muscle protein synthesis. You need leucine, and leucine will regulate enough insulin into the system, that 1.3 insulin to glucagon ratio, to get muscle protein synthesis. But you need to give your body enough protein. Protein will not raise the insulin. It doesn't matter how much you put in. If you're fat adapted and your insulin to glucagon is 1.3, the glucagon suppresses the ability for insulin to rise too high. So you can eat shitloads of protein as long as you don't put sugar in there. If you put sugar in there, combine sugar with protein and fat especially, your insulin to glucagon will be very high, which basically means glucagon will be in the toilet and insulin will be sky high. That's what a SAD diet is. Or if you go and have McDonald's, you basically can push insulin to glucagon up to 70. So the ratio of insulin, how much insulin expression to glucagon, is about 70-fold. That's what we're talking about. So if you want to keep the insulin to glucagon at 1.3, eat a carnivore diet, no fucking carbs at all. Basically. When you're fasting, it's 0.8. That means there's more glucagon and less insulin as a ratio. It's the ratio, how much is in the system. You don't need a lot of insulin to basically drive muscle protein synthesis. You don't. They've done the experiments. You basically need enough protein. And if you put a lot of protein in there, you will build muscle. As long as you don't. But you won't build fat as long as you don't put sugar in there. The sugar fucks things up on the hormonal side. So don't put the sugar in there. have some fat. You don't need a lot of fat, whatever's on the meat, you don't need a lot. And basically prioritize protein. So you can actually become muscular, lean, if that's your goal. I don't know what her goals are exactly because she hasn't elaborated on her specific goals. Some people just like to be have a bit of muscle, and they don't mind having a bit of fat. That doesn't bother them. Others want to be really super lean. I don't know what her goals are, but what I'm saying is, depending on how much your goals are, the key thing is the protein. And remember, don't worry about the protein. Remember the one that I talk about, it does high protein cause kidney problems, which is bullshit. The one with a rat, 70%. In all mammals, we can take shitloads of protein in, absolutely shitloads of protein. And you will become big and muscular, but very lean, because you'll tap into your own fat stores in your body. At some point, you'll go too low. And at that point, you'll know, because you'll shut off some of your hormones. You won't have enough fat, and you'll be, you won't be feeling that fantastic. And that's when you know you've gone too low in the actual reducing your fat stores, and you need to start eating more fat, at that point. Key thing is, fat cells are there to store energy for a rainy day when you don't have it. So when you're fat adapted on an ancestral diet, when you're not eating, you're tapping into your fat stores because you're activating hormone sensitive lipase. Simple as that. It's not a complicated thing. It's a really beautiful system, and a beautiful system that actually allows you to put a lot of fat on seasonally. Like, when the fruit was around seasonally, and you combine fructose together with basically a lot of fatty animals at the end of that's when you really activated these fat storage mechanisms, because you caused the Randle cycle blockade and you rapidly put on weight, which was great. Because when you eat an animal and you're in a low carbohydrate state, and your insulin is sensitive and all that, when you eat fat, even if you're putting 10% away, when you're not eating that, within a couple of hours, that's going to be used. You're going to be tapping in, and you're going to be tapping on into even more reserves. So, but obviously, if you eat an excessive amount of energy, then basically your body's going to say, well, this boatload's coming in. I don't need to release anything from my fat stores. That's when you get a plateau, in that regard. If you want to cut, all bodybuilders know, if you want to cut, you cut all sources of energy, and you basically prioritize protein. I can't say this more than enough. It's well known. It's been done for many years, many decades by bodybuilders. So I don't understand why it seems very strange and weird, and in the general community out there. I mean, if you're basically trying to become pregnant or stuff like that, you don't want to be cutting nutrients. You want to be maximizing nutrients because you're going to have a baby or that. But if it depends what you're trying to do in life, you need to work out what you do. If you're just basically happy with where you are, body wise and all that, and you don't want to basically cut, you don't want to be muscular or anything, you just basically work out how much energy you need and how much protein you need and stick to that. And you just you're fat adapted, and you become weight stable at where you are, and you're good to go. You're happy with the way you are. But if you're trying to do different things like, build muscle, lean out, do those sort of things, you've got to play around with the energy, flux, the energy substrates. You've got to change the energy flux in the system in order to basically tap into reserves if you want to cut, as an example. So it's all about playing around with these sort of things. It's not basically, the body, as long as you're fat adapted and insulin to glucagon is within that normal ancestral level of 1.3, so you don't have excess insulin, low glucagon, that additional glucagon will provide enough capacity to produce, demand-driven gluconeogenesis. You're not going to produce more glucose than the body requires. When you're fat adapted and you've got no sugar in the system, my levels, when I was doing that, no ice cream, none of this sort of stuff, none of those indiscretions, my blood sugars were in the 4s millimoles. We're talking about in the 60 range and 60 and 70 range, for those who are using the other method of counting blood sugar. So that's where they were. Okay. So, and I had ketones, about 3 or sometimes even less than that, 2.5 or whatever. But my blood sugar was just steady as a rock. And if I ate more fat, I remained weight stable. If I removed fat, I started losing, reducing the eating of fat. I started cutting more into my fat stores and using them, and losing fat weight. So to lose fat weight depends on what's coming in at that stage, because basically you're sensitive. Your hormones are sensitive, you're insulin sensitive. So whether you're actually releasing free fatty acid and using that from your fat stores, or whether you're taking it in through the mouth, that will be regulated by all those other systems. They'll say, oops, enough's coming in, it'll signal, and then, up through the, into the brain, telling the brain, oops, tell the fat stores to stop releasing fat because there's plenty coming in. Then if not enough is coming in, it goes, oh, let me just send a signal, tell the brain to send a signal to the fat stores, start releasing. Insulin sensitive lipase gets activated and starts releasing more fat. That's a very reductionist way, but it's actually very dynamic in a sense. It's constantly measuring energy substrates and the energy flux in the system and actually making adjustments, because all cells have different levels of energy that they've taken in at different moments. This is a dynamic system which is constantly adjusting. It's a brilliant system, but in the most simplistic terms is basically, if you're fat adapted and all that, and you want to cut, you basically have to reduce the stuff you're taking in so you can burn more of the stuff you've got on board. Simple as that, guys. Not complicated. And if you really want to pack on fat really fast, best thing, combine sugar and fat, engage the Randall cycle, and you'll pack it on, no problems, if that's your goal, because you're very lean, So if you basically did the thing, you're very lean and your hormones are sort of in the toilet and whatever, and you want to get pregnant or whatever, very easy. Just have a lot of fruit with a lot of cream, combine it and eat plenty of that, and you'll increase your fat stores. Yes, very fast. So, I hope this sort of explains some of these nuanced things and how it actually works, because a lot of people talk in certain generalities and all that, and it's completely confusing. Remember, you've got fat cells there to store energy, okay? So when you're not getting enough energy, you will release them, as long as you're insulin sensitive. That means fat adapted. And as long as you're not engaged in the Randall cycle. So as long as you're either low fat or low carb and you're not mixing your macros. That's when you're going to have these systems that can be activated to utilize energy, stored energy. If you're basically blockading those systems and sending the wrong signals and deranging the system, then it's not going to work. So a lot of people basically have not become fat adapted on a carnivore diet and still have a lot of indiscretions. And as a consequence of having a lot of indiscretions, not having enough discipline, they tend to engage in a very mild way, the Randall cycle, and have plateaued themselves out and can't really access hormone sensitive, their fat stores by activating hormone sensitive lipase. So really, sometimes I say to people, if you want to force yourself into becoming insulin sensitive again, 3-day fast, and then being very disciplined for a while, having a sort of 25 to 30%, about 30% protein and 70% fat for a couple of weeks to basically get your body basically used to it, especially if it's never really been strongly used to. You've never done long ketosis where your body becomes adapted. I mean, like ancestral people. I mean, they do for months upon months because there's never been sugar in it. It's only seasonal. So their bodies are well fat adapted over generations. You know, just because you've done keto for about 3 months or one, a small amount of time or that, you may not be completely fat adapted. You still may have a lot of derangements from your previous diet or previous damage that you still need to sort out. So there can be a lot of factors. We don't come basically from an ancestral, we haven't been born into an ancestral lifestyle. We come from a deranged lifestyle in terms of nutrition and lifestyle and the way we live. And we've created a lot of problems in our bodies. Some people may have very high levels of damage to the mitochondria and struggle to become fat adapted or even produce enough ketones because they've got so much derangement and damage to their mitochondria, and may need to do senolytics and a very disciplined, very therapeutic type ketogenic diet with not the type, the very low protein type, but sort of a moderate and just really pack on, because they've got a lot of tissue, so they're going to recycle a lot of the tissue. So they may need, especially if they're sedentary, they probably don't need as much protein, and then really high in order to change the actual the amount of flush out deuterium out of the cells, and that's the key thing. Lower the deuterium load so they can give and sleep better as well, because melatonin repairs the electron chains. So you need to basically do a lot of these disciplined things to basically start restoring normal energy function again. You may have to also do some, other things, not only senolytics and a lot of this sort of stuff, but also potentially, something that actually increases stem cells. You can work out what sort of avenue you want to go down that to improve, to create new healthy cells throughout the body, which basically means you will actually then have cells with good mitochondria that can actually increase the energy capacity for the operation. So you can shift away from glycolysis to lipolysis, to basically being able to use fat more efficiently and better. I don't know what state people are in. Okay. Sometimes they give me half, they don't give me, that's why I usually say to people, look, comments not going to help me. Give me a complete rundown of what derangements you've got, what damage you've done to your body historically, and how you fucked yourself over, and then I may be able to give you a bit of a rundown on some of the things you can do to basically get yourself back into a more ancestral state. So, and as I said, this is not my day job, so I can only help people, with quick tips. And sometimes I can take some time before I reply back through emails, because there's only so many hours that I've got in the day to be able to, for myself and to do other things. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes if it's a quick question, I can answer it quite fast. But I did want to cover this area so people can understand how all these hormones, but in a very, basic dummies type explanation, so people can understand how these things work and why things may not be working the way you want them to work, and what you may have to fix. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. Anyway, see yous.